38 years. That's how long it took for the truth about Etan Patz's disappearance to finally come to light. But what happened during those years, and what does it reveal about justice and the search for truth? May 25, 1979. 6-year-old Etan Patz set out on what should have been a simple walk to his school bus stop. But on that morning, he vanished. No one saw him again. And just like that, his name became synonymous with a question that would echo for decades. What happened to Etan Patz? The search for Etan was relentless. Law enforcement officers combed through neighborhoods, public spaces, and even the local subway. Thousands of volunteers joined the effort, but each search ended in the same empty silence. No clues, no answers, only questions. Despite all the efforts, no one knew where Etan was or if he'd ever come home. For years, his case would remain one of the most heart-wrenching mysteries in New York City's history. It wasn't until 2012, 33 years later, that the investigation would take a shocking turn. A former bodega worker, Pedro Hernandez, confessed to Etan's murder. But was it the truth? Hernandez's confession seemed too simple, too clean. He claimed to have lured Etan into his store's basement, strangled him, and disposed of his body. But there was one problem: no evidence. The case against him was built on a confession, but without any physical evidence, doubt swirled. Was this man really guilty? Or had the investigation finally cracked under the weight of so many unanswered questions? The trial played out like a legal drama. Every witness, every argument adding more layers to the mystery. And in the end, the jury reached a verdict: second-degree murder, kidnapping. Hernandez was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. For Etan's parents, the verdict was bittersweet. The truth had come out, but it couldn't bring back their son. The years lost were never regained. The hurt was still there, raw and unresolved in ways that only a parent could understand. Etan's disappearance led to sweeping changes. His case helped launch National Missing Children's Day and inspired major reforms in child safety laws. It also ignited a broader movement that saw countless families join together, hoping for their own answers. Etan's case wasn't just about one child. It was a story about how a nation came together to protect its most vulnerable. It was a story about the pursuit of justice, no matter how long it took. For 38 years, Etan's name was a question mark. But now, we know the truth. And we'll never forget the boy who never made it home. Etan Patz was just 6 years old when he vanished on May 25, 1979. He left his home in Soho, New York, early that morning, dressed in his school clothes, ready to walk to the bus stop for the first time on his own. His parents had decided it was time for Etan to take the short walk by himself, a moment that should have marked a milestone in his young life. What seemed like a routine, ordinary day for Etan and his family quickly turned into something unthinkable. By the time his parents realized something was wrong, their world had already been turned upside down. Etan never made it to the bus stop. His disappearance immediately sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, the city, and the entire nation. A search began that evening, growing in intensity as the hours and then the days passed. Hundreds of volunteers, neighbors, and police officers scoured the streets, hoping for a clue, a lead, anything to bring the young boy home. But the search would prove fruitless, and what had begun as a hopeful search for a missing child would evolve into one of the longest and most haunting cases in American history. For years, Etan's disappearance remained a mystery. Every lead brought more questions than answers. Was he abducted? Was he lost? Every theory was explored, yet no one could answer the most pressing question of all. Where was Etan Patz? His story became one of the first to be featured on the now famous milk cartons. In a time when children simply went missing without the tools and technology we have today, the Missing Child on a Milk Carton campaign helped bring Etan's face into millions of homes. His disappearance became a focal point of a larger, growing national movement to protect children and prevent similar disappearances from occurring again. In this video, we'll explore Etan's heartbreaking case from start to finish, examining the twists and turns, the investigators who worked tirelessly, and the heartbreaking toll it took on his family and the community. But we won't stop at the facts you already know. We'll go beyond the headlines, showing the emotional turmoil Etan's parents endured, the impact of his disappearance on the nation's perception of safety, and how, after 38 years, a confession finally brought answers. Join us as we unravel the mystery behind one of America's most tragic and puzzling cases. What could have happened to Etan Patz on that fateful morning? And how did a seemingly quiet neighborhood in Soho, New York, become the epicenter of one of the most haunting mysteries in America? Etan woke up on the morning of May 25, 1979, with the excitement of a normal day. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks. His first solo walk to the school bus stop. His mother, Julie Patz, had packed him a lunch, kissed him goodbye, and watched him leave their apartment at 113 Prince Street in the Soho neighborhood. The streets of Manhattan, which would soon be filled with the chaos of Etan's disappearance, seemed calm and orderly as he made his way towards his school bus. Julie, feeling a sense of both pride and concern, watched her son head out the door. It was a short 2-block walk to the bus stop, nothing out of the ordinary. But as the minutes passed, Etan never arrived at the bus stop. His mother, sensing something was wrong, called the school, only to find that he had never made it there. With panic quickly setting in, Julie called Stanley Patz, Etan's father, who was at work. The unthinkable was happening. By the time Stanley arrived home, the search was already underway. Neighbors gathered in the street, holding hands, crying, and praying for Etan's safe return. The police were called, and before long, hundreds of people were combing the neighborhood, hoping to find any clue as to Etan's whereabouts. But despite the intense efforts of police and volunteers, no trace of Etan was found. It was as though the young boy had vanished into thin air. The shock was evident not just in the Patz family, but across the city. Etan's case soon became a focal point for law enforcement, and the media descended upon Soho, hoping to uncover anything that could help explain what happened. News outlets picked up the story, and Etan's face began to appear on posters, on milk cartons, and in newspapers across the nation. But despite the widespread attention, there were no answers. Initial police investigations led nowhere. Detectives questioned family members, friends, and even strangers who might have been nearby, but they quickly ruled out any connection. The investigation quickly ran into dead ends. No witnesses had seen Etan after he left his apartment. No signs of struggle. No ransom demands. It was as though Etan had simply disappeared without a trace. In the days that followed, the hope that Etan might still be found alive began to fade. The case grew colder as weeks turned into months, then years. What had begun as an urgent search for a missing child soon turned into a years-long mystery. The city, the country, and Etan's family struggled with the terrifying question: where was Etan? The disappearance of Etan Patz would become a national tragedy. But with every passing year, the Patz family's hope began to fade. The mystery seemed to slip further out of reach, and as the years dragged on, Etan's case grew colder. Yet in the hearts of his family, a burning desire for answers never stopped. In the silence of their grief, the search for the truth continued. As the investigation unfolded, authorities turned to various suspects. But would they find the right one? And what secrets were hidden in plain sight? From the start, investigators explored a range of possible leads, but one name kept resurfacing: Jose Ramos. A convicted child molester, Ramos had been a friend of Etan's former babysitter and lived nearby in the same Soho neighborhood. Investigators were initially drawn to him due to his criminal history, but also because of disturbing rumors that connected him to Etan's disappearance. Ramos had a history of luring young boys into secluded areas. In fact, shortly after Etan went missing, several other boys came forward with allegations that Ramos had tried to coax them into a nearby drainpipe. Though authorities searched the area and found no direct connection between Ramos and Etan's disappearance, they couldn't dismiss the possibility that he might have been involved. Over the years, detectives kept tabs on Ramos, but he denied any involvement in Etan's case. In 1990, While Ramos was incarcerated in Pennsylvania on unrelated charges of child molestation, investigators took the opportunity to interview him again. During this time, Ramos made cryptic statements that caught the attention of law enforcement. When questioned about Etan's disappearance, he vaguely referenced a boy who resembled Etan, claiming he had taken him back to his apartment with the intent to abuse him. Though he didn't name Etan outright, the chilling suggestion that he had been involved in the boy's disappearance raised more questions. He mentioned a subway ride that seemed to imply he had done something with the child, but again, no concrete evidence was found. Theories about Ramos's involvement in Etan's case began to take hold. Jailhouse informants claimed that Ramos had confided in them, admitting he knew what had happened to Etan. One informant even claimed Ramos had drawn a map of the school bus route, indicating he knew where Etan would have been waiting for his bus. Despite all of this, police had no physical evidence linking him to the crime, and Ramos continued to deny any involvement. Over time, other theories emerged about the case. Investigators began looking into a local handyman who had worked in the building near where Etan lived. The handyman was known to have had access to the basement of the building, which was soon brought into the investigation. Some speculated that the basement, which was recently refurbished after Etan's disappearance, might hold the key to the mystery. However, after thorough searches of the area, no evidence surfaced to suggest the handyman was involved. Media attention continued to escalate throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Etan's face appeared on milk cartons across the country, a new and powerful tool in the Missing Children campaign. Public awareness of child abductions grew, and Etan's case became a symbol of the nation's collective fear and determination to protect children. The milk carton campaign not only brought attention to Etan but also to other missing children, contributing to an increase in child protection legislation and the creation of national missing persons databases. The media frenzy, however, did little to bring answers to the mystery of Etan's disappearance. As years passed, the case grew cold. Despite extensive coverage and multiple leads, no breakthrough materialized, and Etan's whereabouts remained a mystery. Investigators were left to piece together the fragments of a case that had lost its clarity with time. The frustration of not being able to bring closure to Etan's family was felt by everyone involved in the investigation. For all the attention and resources poured into finding Etan, the case seemed to slip further into the shadows of history. The search for Etan Patz became a chilling reminder of the limitations of law enforcement in solving cases without the proper evidence. Over time, many who had followed the case wondered if they would ever see justice served, and if the truth would ever come to light. The years passed, and with them, the case seemed to fade from the public consciousness. Despite years of searching, Etan's whereabouts remained unknown, and the case grew cold. It would take a breakthrough in 2010 to reignite the investigation. The case would soon take an unexpected turn, one that would provide answers, but also leave lingering questions about the reliability of confessions, the passage of time, and the true nature of justice. In 2010, the case would be reopened. But this time, it wasn't just about finding clues. It was about finding the truth that had been buried for over 3 decades. The wheels of justice had ground to a halt, but new hope emerged as the Manhattan District Attorney's Office decided to revisit the case. The passage of time had not erased the memories of Etan Patz or the pain his family endured. With the help of new forensic technologies and a relentless desire to uncover the truth, investigators started reviewing evidence once again, hoping to finally piece together what had happened to the young boy. Then, in May 2012, a bombshell dropped. Pedro Hernandez, a man from New Jersey, was arrested and charged with the murder and kidnapping of Etan Patz. Hernandez, who was 51 years old at the time, had confessed to the crime in a statement given to police. His confession claimed that on the day Etan disappeared, he had lured the boy into the basement of a local bodega where he worked. Hernandez said he strangled Etan in the basement and then disposed of his body. The chilling confession sent shockwaves through the city, and the investigation into Etan's case, which had long seemed dead, was reignited with fresh urgency. But the confession itself was a complicated and controversial piece of the puzzle. The police had a confession, but was it genuine? Investigators faced a dilemma. Hernandez's mental state was immediately called into question. He had a history of mental health issues and had been diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder, which often includes hallucinations and delusions. His defense team would later claim that Hernandez had low intelligence, with an IQ in the borderline intellectual range, and that his confession could have been the result of coercion or confusion. The skepticism surrounding Hernandez's confession grew as more details emerged. It was unclear whether he had the precise knowledge of Etan's disappearance that would indicate he was the real perpetrator. He had worked in the bodega in the same area where Etan lived, but did he know the specifics of Etan's route and where he would be that morning? Furthermore, Hernandez had never been officially identified as a suspect until this moment, and the confession seemed to come out of nowhere. There was no physical evidence linking him to Etan's body, which had never been found. And while some of his statements matched details of the case, others were vague or inconsistent. The case, it seemed, had entered another layer of uncertainty. The legal challenges were immense. In 2012, Hernandez's defense team filed motions to have his confession dismissed, arguing that it had been made under duress and without a proper understanding of his rights. The debate over whether his confession should be admissible in court went on for months. Critics argued that his confession might have been a product of his mental condition and that it should not be trusted, while others pointed to the fact that Hernandez had led investigators to details about Etan's case that only the true perpetrator would know. As the investigation continued, the emotional reaction to Hernandez's confession was profound. Etan's parents, Stanley and Julie Patz, had spent over 3 decades in search of answers. Every year, they marked the anniversary of Etan's disappearance, holding on to the hope that one day they would know what had happened to their son. Their reaction to Hernandez's confession was a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak. After so many years of uncertainty, could this finally be the answer they had been waiting for? The confession gave them a glimmer of closure, but it also reignited the pain of Etan's absence. For Julie Patz, the truth brought a sense of relief, but also a deep sadness that her son's life had been stolen so violently. The community, too, reacted with a range of emotions. For many, Hernandez's confession brought a sense of justice, but there was also a lingering unease about the nature of that justice. The idea that a mentally disturbed man might have confessed to a crime he didn't commit, or that his confession had been coerced, raised uncomfortable questions about the reliability of confessions and the methods used to secure them. In the larger context of the case, the confession also brought the issue of child safety back into the public conversation. Etan's disappearance had been one of the first cases to highlight the vulnerability of children, and his case had fueled a nationwide movement to protect children from abductions. The reopening of the case reminded the public of how much had changed in the fight for child safety. But it also highlighted how, for some families, the pain of not knowing what happened to a loved one could endure for decades. Pedro Hernandez's confession led to a trial that would leave everyone questioning the reliability of confessions, the psychological factors involved, and whether justice could truly be served after so many years. The legal process would bring the case into the courtroom, where the stakes were higher than ever, and the emotional impact on the Patz family would remain at the forefront of the proceedings. As the case progressed, the lingering uncertainty over whether Hernandez was truly responsible for Etan's death would continue to haunt the trial, even as the family struggled to come to terms with the truth they had longed to hear. In the end, the question that everyone was left with was this: did the passage of time rob Etan's family of the true justice they deserved? Would the real truth ever come to light? Or was this confession just one more layer of tragedy added to an already heartbreaking case? But would the confession be enough to bring justice? What did the trial reveal about the complexity of the case and the emotional toll it took on all those involved? The trial of Pedro Hernandez began in 2015, after years of delays and legal battles. The central question was whether his confession, which had been given without legal counsel and under questionable circumstances, could be trusted as the foundation for a conviction. The defense team argued that Hernandez's confession was unreliable due to his mental condition, his history of mental illness, and his borderline intellectual functioning. His attorneys claimed that he was coerced into confessing and that the police had manipulated him during his interrogation. Throughout the trial, experts testified about Hernandez's mental health. Psychological evaluations revealed that he suffered from a personality disorder and had a history of delusions. His defense team contended that Hernandez's confession could not be taken at face value, and they pointed out inconsistencies in his statements. Some of the details he provided about Etan's disappearance were vague or incorrect, raising doubts about his knowledge of the crime. The prosecution, however, argued that Hernandez's confession contained enough accurate details to prove his guilt, and that his mental state did not absolve him of responsibility for his actions. The emotional weight of the trial was felt most profoundly by Etan's family. Stanley and Julie Patz had spent over 3 decades searching for answers, and now, after all these years, they were finally sitting in a courtroom, hoping for justice for their son. The years of uncertainty and pain were etched into their faces as they listened to the testimony, particularly when it came to the details of Etan's death. No parent should ever have to endure the horror of hearing about the final moments of their child's life, and for the Patz family, this trial was a grim reminder of everything they had lost. Throughout the proceedings, Julie Patz attended every day, often sitting in the front row, her face somber but resolute. Stanley, too, was there, supporting his wife through the painful process, knowing that even if they obtained a conviction, it would never bring Etan back. The emotional toll of the trial was immense, as it forced the Patz family to relive the horror of their son's disappearance over and over again, even as they clung to the hope that the truth was finally within reach. The media, too, continued to follow the case closely. For years, Etan's disappearance had been one of the most high-profile cases of a missing child in America, and his story had become symbolic of the pain and uncertainty felt by families of missing children. As the trial progressed, the media coverage intensified, with reporters closely tracking each new development, from the testimony of witnesses to the arguments presented by the defense and prosecution. The case was a reminder of the widespread fear of child abductions and the efforts to improve the way missing children cases were handled in the U.S. over the past few decades. Etan's face had been plastered on milk cartons, and now, his case was once again capturing the attention of the public. For the Patz family, the media's constant presence was both a source of comfort and distress. On the one hand, the attention meant that their son's case was not forgotten, but on the other hand, it magnified the pain they had carried for so many years. The Patz family's emotional journey, from hope to grief and finally to some semblance of closure, was now playing out in front of the world. As the trial drew to a close in early 2017, the jury was tasked with deciding whether Pedro Hernandez's confession could be believed, given all the psychological and legal complexities that surrounded it. The prosecution argued that despite Hernandez's mental health issues, he had provided accurate details about the crime, and that his confession was consistent with the known facts of the case. The defense, however, maintained that Hernandez's mental state made him an unreliable witness to his own actions, and that the confession was the result of police pressure rather than a genuine admission of guilt. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. On February 14, 2017, Pedro Hernandez was found guilty of second-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping in the case of Etan Patz. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and sadness. For the Patz family, it was a bittersweet moment. They had waited 38 years for an answer, but even with Hernandez's conviction, the years of uncertainty, pain, and loss would never be erased. Pedro Hernandez was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. While the conviction brought some closure to the case, it did not bring back Etan. His family would never be able to undo the damage done by his disappearance, nor could they fully heal from the years of not knowing what happened to their son. The case of Etan Patz had profound implications not only for the Patz family, but for the broader justice system and society at large. It highlighted the complexities of dealing with confessions, particularly in cases involving individuals with mental health issues. It also raised questions about the reliability of evidence gathered over decades, and whether justice could ever truly be served when so much time had passed. The case also underscored the growing awareness and response to child abductions in the U.S., and the importance of keeping the memory of missing children alive, even in the face of uncertainty. Pedro Hernandez's conviction marked the end of a long and painful chapter for Etan's family, but it also opened up a new chapter for the nation in terms of the fight to protect children and bring perpetrators of these horrific crimes to justice. For the Patz family, it was a step toward healing, though they would always carry the weight of the years spent without knowing the truth. And while justice had been served, the pain of Etan's loss would never truly fade. If you found this case compelling, make sure to check out our next video where we explore deep into another cold case that was solved after 42 years of silence. The story of a kid's being murdered at home. We'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Was justice truly served, or is there more to the story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's discuss. Your insights are important to us, and we want to keep the conversation going. If you think someone else needs to hear this story, make sure to share it. Stay tuned for more cases, more mysteries, and more moments that challenge what we know about the pursuit of justice. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and thank you for joining us on this journey.